Hello friends, today I'm going to be doing a video that I've seen virtually every booktuber do at some point, but I've yet to do it on my channel, so we're going to do it today, and that is reacting to one-star reviews of my favorite books. So we're going to find out how egregious and how wrong people can be. Let's get to it. Now, one of my favorite books is Solenoid by Cărtărescu. I've talked about this book endlessly on the channel in many different videos, but just knowing how it's written, the style of prose, the stream of consciousness, I can imagine what people are going to be saying about it. Couldn't get as far as 100 pages into this. I think the genre is supposed to be surrealism, but it seems more just like the self-indulgent babbling of a moron. Maybe it's just the translation, don't know. The writer or perhaps the translator is obviously skilled, but I can't get anywhere with it. Good luck. Especially in the first 100 pages, this book is a lot of babbling, and there's honestly a lot of writers like this where you kind of have to crack the shell of the nut, I guess, to really get anywhere. And specifically this book, if you don't fall in love with that very like garrulous, hyper detailed writing style, very introspective, kind of pretentious at different times, narrative, then you're going to get lost. And the same with Knausgaard and some of these other writers. But I think even if that's not your jam, you got to get 200-300 pages in, but that is a hard sell. Usually if the book's not working for you 100 pages in, it's probably not going to work with you in the long run. So I understand that review, I do. See, this is a good example of what I'm talking about. Jillian says, "I'm sorry, I tried so many times and I genuinely could not finish this one. It was so dense and full of unnecessary description. The amount of time spent on such trivial things just killed me. How anyone can get through this is a mystery to me. The cover is amazing, but that's all I have to say about this one." Totally understandable. I mean, I think in the first chapter there's a lot of babbling about lint within a belly button and all these little bit details in his baby hair that he's collecting and things like that. And again, if you're not willing or interested in getting lost in those intricate details and the kind of magic that in my opinion emerges out of his prose and out of the linguistics of it, if it's just you're looking more for plot and simple direction rather than the kind of, I don't know, flow or the evocative power of a sentence, then this book probably won't work for you. Versus for me, that's exactly what I cling to in a writer. I think my wife put it perfectly when she said to me, you really love a well-written sentence. And I think it's a simple way of putting it, but a pretty accurate way. And here's one more review that gives a little bit more of a detailed explanation of why it didn't work for her. She says, "Solenoid opens with a passage of a school teacher discussing head lice, only to follow that up with a full chapter of that same teacher staring into and picking at his own belly button. I couldn't sum up this book any more perfect if I tried. This book is a length account of our protagonist navel-gazing in the form of journal entries, throwing in the occasional existential musing to disguise its self-obsessiveness as intellectualism. She does give some credit where it's due. She says, the prose is stunning and the vocabulary of both author and translator must be incredibly extensive to pull off this feat of writing. It's a shame I found there to be so little substance or story behind those words." And I think that's right. I think a lot of this book is navel gazing. It's just, is the navel gazing working for you or not? And for me, when I think on the philosophical and theoretical conceptions that emerge out of this toying and perhaps, snobbish musing over a fourth dimension and trying to collect or connect some of these historical figures together, and comparing everything to these, mice on the hand and doing this macro microcosm thing, it either clicks or it doesn't. It either clicks or it doesn't, and for me it did. So that's Solenoid. Next, we have to go to probably the most detested but also glorified novel that there is, especially within the Dude Bro universe, and that is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Let's get into this one. This one's pretty good. Infinite jest is a symptom of something wrong in the literary world. Is there nothing else out there with meaning people can find to adore? It's neither a work of genius, nor is it insightful. There are serious things wrong with this book. I think the bigger problem here is why anyone, anywhere, thinks this is brilliant. She goes on to say, critics rave about this novel for many reasons, one of which I suppose is so that they don't have to talk about the concrete and tremendous problems we are actually facing. God forbid literature should be anything more than a ridiculous competition between whose work is the most groundbreaking and incoherent. Now, I have to admit, I think she's completely right for the most part. I don't know enough about postmodernist literature to fully back up this claim, but from what I have read and what I do know, it seems like most postmodernist authors are in this undeclared or unannounced informal competition of who can write the most confusing, perplexing, and incoherent book imaginable. I mean, you have Gravity's Rainbow, you have Infinite Jest out there, you can think of William Gass, you can think of Krasnohorkai, you can probably shoe in William Gaddis into that, and all of these books are massive, they're chunkers, they're bemusing, and you know, there's almost this pretentious quality attached to them. You know, this usage of, you know, highly complex verbiage, and Wallace is probably the king of that. He is probably the king of navel gazing, and even with that, I love it. Even with that, I find a lot of the humor is juvenile. A lot of it is coherent. Again, the plot is almost completely missing from a lot of these novels. And, you know, there's unnecessary complexity added to them, whether it's because of the, confusing chronology of the book, or whether they decide to do away with punctuation. Postmodernist authors just find a way to kind of unnecessarily frustrate you and vex you while you're reading the book. I don't know. I still find the jokes to land most of the time. I still find the elaborate vocabulary to be quite insightful and kind of teach me a lot of new words as well. All right, now this one's vitriolic. He says, I want to give it 0 stars. This book is a giant pile of pretentious drivel with 1,000 pages and hundreds of endnotes. Endnotes, damn it. You need 2 bookmarks for this shit. You really do. It's a book full of promises that are never delivered. By the end, it feels like a practical joke has been perpetrated on you, and the appropriate response is to punch the author in the face. I can't argue with him. I think the excessive endnotes are ridiculous, and a lot of things that sometimes Wallace would do things intentionally antagonistically. Like, he would intentionally do things that he knows are ridiculous, that he knows are going to limit his readership, that he knows that are a pain in the ass. And he would do things that are funny to him, but are just a pain in the ass for everyone else. Like, you know, the fact that there are, you know, like 150 pages of endnotes, and a lot of the endnotes are just dumb jokes. It's classic Wallace. It either works or it doesn't. For most people, I'd say it doesn't work. For me, it really depends. But is this pretentious drivel? 100%. 100%. Now, I know for many of you, those last 2 books are probably not your cup of tea. You either love those books or hate them. But this next one is pretty much universally loved, and it's a bona fide classic, so I'm curious what people will say about it, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. All right, this first review says, in my opinion, this is just a book about Victorian snobs talking about snobby things, and I don't like snobs. Quote, I used to hate Mr. Darcy until I found out he has $10,000 a year. Now I'm madly in love with him. The unromantic linking of money and love are just too much for me. It just makes women of this time period seem pathetic. And he goes on later, says he can cross this off as a classic. This just is like the most obvious sign that you didn't really read the book, because the whole point is she goes in expecting this pretentious quality from him. She has this prejudice, and she doesn't even understand, and she doesn't actually like him, even though he makes that much money. In fact, a lot of what Austen is trying to explore within the novel is the different reasons or incentives for women to marry, whether it is for status, whether it is for financial purposes, whether it is for familial reasons, or for the reason of worldly prosperity, I believe is what she calls it. And so you see these different relationships form, and you see the ways that they falter, the way that they're not romantically rooted. They're rooted kind of for the wrong reasons. And that's what you see in this book, is that Elizabeth Bennet is not loving him and madly falling in love because of the money. It's more of his kindness. It's more of getting to know the man of Mr. Darcy and his heart and what he does for her sister. So I feel like that's just the most blatant, obvious show and tell that you didn't truly understand the novel. This one I disagree with, but I also kind of see where they're coming from. Caroline says, flowery, pretentious writing does not make a good... Sorry, I had to pause there because I realized there's a glaring typo in this. Perhaps it's their second language, but it says, I'll quote it directly, flowery, pretentious writing does not a good story make. So it doesn't make a good story. Austen created stiff, one-dimensional characters, brought them to life as much as she could in a boring plot, and had two of them fall in love somehow. No one writes romance colder than Austen did. Now, the reason why I feel that this isn't true is because I went into it expecting a cold, straightforward, highly predictable romance. And to some extent, you do see it coming. You do know the end. But the fact that you know the end and yet you're still enchanted by the novel and by the characters tells you that they're not one-dimensional. Tells you that there is depth within these 300 or so odd pages. And I found all the characters to be quite lively. I mean, even the side characters, like a Mr. Bennet, you don't get a ton of screen time with him, so to speak. He doesn't have a ton of dialogue, but you really do see he even has, multiple layers to them, let alone the main characters, whether it is Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, or whether it's also Mr. Bingley and all of the Bennet sisters, really. The next novel is another big favorite of mine, and that is Stoner by John Williams. Quote, I've had enough of reading books written by men in which the female characters are written poorly, weirdly, or out of spite and misogyny, incorporating them in lots of parts while giving them no real significance to the story as their own characters, but rather as a part or reflection of the male characters, villainizing them as crazy, evil, failed girlfriends, wives, mothers, or some other form of lame, unjust writing. If you want to ruin your novel and make it unoriginal and uninteresting, that's your problem. But what I do not get is why the hell on the expense, I guess they mean at the expense of women. I get where they're coming from. The women in the story are not written particularly well. A lot of them, I think generally all of them except perhaps the daughter, do play a bit of a villainous role. Although it's not really that the women are the villain. I think they're very much the victims in this story. And really, specifically in Stoner's life and in his marriage, both him and his wife are kind of tearing each other apart. I mean, basically from the jump, you can tell that William Stoner and his wife Edith are not meant to be together. They're not very compatible. It's kind of just this instance where, it happens in your life, and that's kind of what this book is hinting at, and beyond just the idea of marriage, is sometimes accidental things happen in your life. You start working at a certain job by accident, you bump into someone and start a relationship with someone by accident, and if you just allow your life to be a lot of these passive, incidental, accidental situations and actions, and you don't really grab life by the lapels and try and assert yourself, then you're going to end up in a life full of regret and in a relationship that is tumultuous and abusive, and it leads you into infidelity. And that's what happens with Stoner. And you just have a sorry life, and a life filled with regret, like I said. But I think she's totally right. I think the women in these books are they're really only used as levers for the male characters, and they do really contain a lot of toxic traits with very few positive traits. So I think that's why some critics have called this dude bro, or called it more of like one of those kind of male or incel type books. But I don't know. I think there's much more at hand here. The next review says, quote, if I wanted to experience this much melancholy, I'd just live my life. I'm trying to escape here, not look into a mirror. This book is devoid of spirit and brimming with nihilism. I will never understand why anyone would want to feel the emotions this book conveys. I found my time with this book to be depressing and soul-crushing. 100%. I agree with that 100%. I'm not a sad person. I think I'm generally pretty cheerful, pretty optimistic. But I don't know, I do get kind of like a joy, or I don't know about joy is the right word. I enjoy a melancholic novel. I enjoy sad songs. Even if I'm not particularly sad, even if I don't have a breakup or some, horrible relationship, I think we all, sometimes you get something and some emotional release from some kind of soul-crushing, depressive book like this. Like, it's not something you want to read all the time, especially it sounds like this reader is more someone who reads for escapism. But I don't know, there's so much that can be gained by facing some of these heavy emotions and viewing really, I don't know. A lot of people argue that Stoner's life isn't negative. It's not a bad life. John Williams himself said that Stoner lived a good life. But I think most of us who read it walk away going, well, that's a good example of what I don't want to do. And I think that this book really illuminates and gives you an entire life to examine, to digest, and to consider and contemplate on. And I think there's a lot of value in that. It's not just about reading for escapism, for happy stuff all the time. Life is gloomy, I should say. Life is gloomy and full of despair. But it doesn't mean we should always, I guess, look away from the despair. There can be a lot gained. Although Nietzsche would say against this, but there can be a lot gained by looking down into the abyss. Now let's move on to The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I think this review highlights why this book may not work for certain people. I'll try and, condense it a little bit, but it starts with saying, this book temporarily killed my love of reading and sent me spiraling into a reading slump that lasted 2 months. Essentially, she couldn't finish it. She barely worked through the final parts of it. She says, these characters are such high school drama. They're storming with jealousy, bitter, angry, infatuated, obsessed, crying. She goes on and on. Then doing it all over again over a span of a few pages. I couldn't take it seriously. She goes on to leave a quote at the bottom, where she says, I found a quote that I think sums up the author's attitude towards his characters. Quote, but in some cases, it is really more creditable to be carried away by an emotion, however unreasonable, which springs from a great love, than to be unmoved. No, is what she says. Dostoevsky is a romantic. Not just a romantic, he's an idealist. And a lot of his characters are irrational. They're erratic. It's not that the characters are not believable, but everything is almost turned up a notch. Everything is almost exaggerative. They're flying at you. They're shaking their fists. And some of that is translation. Some of that is just theatrical narrative that is perhaps Dostoevsky's style, but also the style of the time and the tradition that Dostoevsky is kind of emerging out of and blending with. And I think that if you go into you look at Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, or you look at Dmitri and the Brothers Karamazov, or you look at Prince Mishkin and the Idiot, and you expect like sensible characters making rational decisions, you're making a huge mistake. It is not about making these rational decisions. In fact, it actually questions and mocks and ridicules the idea of excessive rationalism. And I think that when you go into these novels, you have to keep that in mind. You have to keep in mind the philosophical and ideological views that Dostoevsky is trying to challenge and intertwine within his characters, how each character symbolizes and acts as a mouthpiece for these different opposing views within an ideological debate. And that's why I always say that the best place to start with Dostoevsky is Notes from Underground, because you get a novella, you get a shorter book than some of these more formidable and intimidating novels, and you kind of get to see, you get a feel for it, you get a taste of his prose, but you also get a little bit of a base layer of the ideology that is being thrown in, acts as the foundation for a lot of his characters in these novels. If you just jump right into this as your first piece of Russian literature, even if you're an English major like this individual, you're going to be thrown for a whirl. So it's not that Russian literature maybe doesn't work for you, although a lot of it does have this romanticism, this idealism, or even surrealism at different times. But, you're not going to get Tolstoy. You're not going to get this kind of very serious, straightforward, direct depiction or narrative, explaining to you exactly what this character is doing or why he's doing this. You have a lot of characters acting irrationally. That's actually the magic of Dostoevsky and why I prefer him more than Tolstoy, because of the psychological complexity of his characters. It's really magnificent, and unfortunately it didn't work for her. Here's another review that is totally fair, but also explains why it's not the book's fault, but it's more your fault. This woman, she begins by saying she really loved Crime and Punishment, but this book didn't work for her. So she says, I've given this enough time and I'm going to cut my losses, closing in on 350 pages. Such a shame. The part 3, especially, but part 4 are some of the best parts. But anyway, or a bit better than 1/3. It may be that I've gotten past the most tedious parts of a long sermon by one of the priests in the monastery and some sort of religious rambling by one of the brothers. This latter was one long paragraph over several pages. I'm not interested in arguments about whether or not there is a God or whether the Roman Catholic Church wants to take over the world. And she goes on and on, less philosophizing. What are you talking about? That's the magic of the book. The primary premise of the book is, if there is no God, everything is permitted. That's one of the central questions and themes of this book, and one of the central questions of ethics and of moral philosophy. Like that's the central question. Like, if there isn't divine morality, then how can we seek out or justify some idea or conception of object morality? This is the question that Friedrich Nietzsche was trying to explore as well. Gosh. Less philosophizing. Don't read Dostoevsky then. Like, that's it. Crime and Punishment is centered around some of those same ideas that Nietzsche toys with, couple countries over to the west. Like, oh my God. And then calling it a bunch of religious rambling. It's like the Grand Inquisitor is one of the greatest kind of like sub-stories, in all of Dostoevsky's writings. Like, it's like, if you can't read these books for surface level story and, sensual excitement. Like, you have to go into these books to dig deep, to excavate, to explore the novel. I just don't know why you're reading this book if you're just going to call it a bunch of religious rambling. And just ask for less philosophizing. I don't know. I don't know. Again, the with all these books, especially Dostoevsky, though, the plot is not overly complicated. The father gets killed. There's arguing over a specific girl. There's really not that much plot over 800 pages, but it's not about going from A to B to following action to the end. It's about reading between the lines, reading within the dialogue and the thoughts and the ramblings or monologues. All these soliloquies are not in there just because Dostoevsky wanted to write more or carry on about his own religious quandaries. They're there with intention. They're there with purpose. Sorry, that one got me. All right, let's finish with one more book, another Russian novel, And Quiet Flows of Dawn by Mikhail Sholokhov. This first review is so idiotic. It is so blatantly dumb and shows how unaware this person is of the author's background, and really the story itself didn't read it well at all. And that is heavy pro-communist propaganda. Are you kidding me? The guy from Cossack Blood himself that witnessed and pleaded to Stalin about the de-Cossacization. Basically, Stalin's policy to absolutely put pressure on, murder, displace Cossacks, all kinds of peasants within the Ukrainian region. That led to Golodomor, and all these different policies, de-Kulakization. The guy that witnessed all of that and was pleading with Stalin to end it or try to make peace with the Cossacks, that's the guy you're going to say wrote heavy pro-communist propaganda? Oh my God, let alone the story itself. You end up following how a civil war and ideological conflict rips families apart, brothers upon brothers, killing their fellow soldiers and citizens, ravaging through different towns and villages. Like, it is not pro-communist propaganda, I assure you that. Here's another review I utterly despise and disagree with. This is a really unexceptional book with an exceptionally bad translation. The latter may be a part of the reason why I rate this book very low. Wooden characters, a lot of brutality that is rendered in a very casual way, and simply really, really boring. The war scenes are some of the most just vivacious and gruesome and graphic, and the characters, you live with them, you witness their grief and their pain and their longing and their strain while at war or away from the village, or even the women at home. Oh my God, I couldn't disagree more. Completely wrong. Now, this review provides a little bit more context for why they didn't like the book. More chronicle than novel, seldom in the story do the Cossacks actually do anything. Instead, things kind of just happen to them, showing no real opinions about events. Their personalities flatten under a leaden fatalism while the narrative stresses the historical progressions of events. Maybe the genre forces this, but if it shorts the human element, it has to have a darn good alternative. Does this book work the alternatives? And he goes on. But I don't find that to be accurate. The idea that the Cossacks do nothing, it kind of shows a little bit of a misunderstanding of the Cossacks' role within Russia and their kind of servitude, historical servitude, or subservient nature to the Russian government, and how they kind of act as like a mercenary army. And they definitely do things, and they definitely have opinions and personalities. I mean, the different love stories within the novels, and infidelity that exists. Like, I don't know how you read that and walk away saying that the characters don't have any reactions or any emotional response. Like, I don't know. I don't know. But at least I get what he's saying. It's definitely more of a chronicle than novel. And to some, as pointed out by some comments in the past, this isn't the entire story. I'd say this is like the key chunk of it, but there's 4 parts as far as I know. I think this has like part 1 and part 2, or maybe just one of the parts to it. So the story does end a little bit anticlimactic in that the final chapters, from my memory, don't really give you much of closure. Don't give you much closure, but that's because you can continue to read more. But I don't know. I think of a lot of the Russian novels, for just over 500 pages, this novel is thrilling, it's compelling, it's emotionally distressing, in kind of the best ways, in ways that really, I don't know, make you feel alive, both for better and for worse, and that really express human experience through extreme trials and destruction, basically. But anyway, I will not take the slander of any of these books. But let me know in the comments down below whether you agree, disagree, whether you've seen other horrendous reviews, or what you think is the reason why some of these books don't work for people. That's what I'm trying to conceptualize. It's like, opinions are opinions, right or wrong, whatever. I think, we can objectify art to some extent and say that a book is better or worse to some extent, but at the end of the day, a book might not work for you, and that's fine. I don't need to force it upon you, but at the same time, I'm curious why it didn't work, especially when it comes to me recommending you books or you recommending me books. Like, I need to kind of understand the reasons of why Dostoevsky doesn't work. If you have no interest in theology or philosophy, yeah, Dostoevsky's not for you. I'm not going to recommend him. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So let me know in the comments. Run with any of these questions wherever you want to go to. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more content, and I will see you all in the next one.